Welcome to another episode of On the Front Porch. Literally. So I literally am sitting on my front porch, and I'm pretty sure that you can hear the sounds because you can't see the sights, but you can hear the sounds in the background, and hopefully it's not too distracting for you. But as I think about this work that I've been fortunate to do, and all that I learned about myself and people, um, really being in proximity to folks keeps me grounded, but also digging deep for lots of questions. And so today's episode is going to kind of set the tone of what is to come, I think, really for the remainder of this season. You know that our first two episodes featured some incredible special guests. So thanks again to both Courtney English, who serves as Chief Policy Officer for and Senior Advisor to the 61st Mayor of the City of Atlanta, which is Mayor Andre Dickens, and then also Aaron Johnson, who serves as a portfolio manager for Partnership for Southern Equity, and he's also a trauma-informed specialist, a consultant, a trainer in his own right. And I really think that they help set the tone as we talked about this concept of it's deeper than water, right? This idea that the very thing that we all need for life sustenance, the very thing that we all need in order to breathe and to live and to thrive is water. And that very thing, so many young people were criminalized for in 2020. But I don't want to dwell on that because I think a lot of times we stay stuck and what was the catalyst instead of using it as the why to continue to delve deeper into some of the other challenges that a lot of times the people that we're serving are facing. So let's get into it. All right, so I have this concept, and it's not new. I'm not going to sit here and profess that it is. So if the title seems a little similar to other things that you've heard, I'm admitting that what I'm about to say is not a new concept, but it is something that I want to just dive deeper into as I'm researching and studying and thinking through solutions and implementation, even how to really think about policy differently. And it's this idea of Black boys and the criminality of being poor. And so some folks will be like, well, being poor doesn't mean you're a criminal. It doesn't. The criminality of being poor really means that most folks who are in positions of influence and power, or folks who are in a different stature in terms of economic stability, may have some subconscious bias around the proximity to criminal behavior and your economic status, and if you're at or below the poverty line. So it's a couple of things I jotted down that I just want to share with us, and I encourage respectful dialogue. I do not, I'm not naive enough to believe that everybody is going to believe what I'm saying or agree with it, and so we can have discourse, right? So I'm going to leave the comments open if there's something that you want to share respectfully. So first I want to, just give a shout out to CJ Stewart. CJ Stewart is a local nonprofit leader here in Atlanta. He is a former professional Major League Baseball player as well. And he and his beautiful wife, Kelly, lead an organization, the Lead Center for Youth. And he talks about these three curveballs as their why their organization was founded and what keeps them grounded and moving forward. And he says that those three curveballs are racism, poverty, and crime. And when I first heard him say that, I was like, gosh, that sums up so much of even what the young people that I serve are experiencing. Because I tell people all the time that doing this work, I'm really trying to lessen the effects of poverty that a lot of our young people are experiencing and facing. And so he would go on, and this is CJ Stewart, he would go on to explain his rationale is that racism breeds poverty, which then leads to crime. And, it's not to trivialize the solution, but a lot of times people are like, how do we solve for crime? You fix poverty. I mean, it doesn't have to be any deeper than that. Because a lot of times, crimes that are committed out of necessity, need, inadvertent, meaning that there was not an intention of committing a crime, but in the course of getting what you need, ordinances, laws were broken. Yes, I will admit there's some folks who willfully, disobey laws and commit crimes, but a lot of folks don't set out on their day to say, I'm going to go break the law today. And then when you get them in a cycle, right, of the criminal justice system, and then you have folks who say, oh no, if they pay their debt to society, let's give them another chance, but yet they can't find livable wage jobs, then in a sense, they go back to what they know until they get caught again. We're gonna talk a little bit about that, a little bit more about that. But yeah, so if you want to solve for poverty, if you want to solve crime, then we got to begin to solve for poverty. Here's the other piece that I want to focus on is, should factors like race, poverty, housing, academic achievement serve as a precursor or a condition on how we engage Black boys, right? Should those factors dictate how we should engage Black boys? So public opinion, right? Now this is what people will say out loud in public, and it may not be what they really believe in their personal lives. But public opinion will say that those factors shouldn't matter when assessing whether the behavior of Black boys should be punished as criminal behavior or if the Black boys themselves are seen as the criminals, right? It's this whole idea of us being able to move towards not defining people by their experiences. For instance, I'll give you some examples. We no longer in academia and in nonprofit industry, community industry, public policy, we no longer, if being politically correct, we don't say slaves, right? Because that's not who they were, is what they did. So, or what was done and forced upon them, actually. So instead of saying slaves, we say persons who were enslaved, right? We want to focus on the thing that was forced upon them versus saying that they were the thing. Another example is most of us have moved away from saying that somebody is homeless versus someone is unhoused or a person who is without a permanent residence at this time, right? And so some people may say that's a lot of words, but it's about dignity. And it's the same thing with this idea of criminality and Black boys. Is the behavior itself criminal, or are we defining them as the criminal? And those are two different things. Because one would venture to say, well, if you keep doing the thing over and over again, then you are that, right? Versus someone is forced into a position to do a thing over and over again because there are limited resources and limited options. Doesn't make them the criminal. It makes them engage in criminal behavior. And I really do believe that if we took the time to really assess and understand how words have power, right? Not just in church, not just speaking, not just manifesting, just words themselves have power because it begins to seep into our psyche of what subconscious then tells us to believe about somebody, how to engage someone, how to respond to these persons based on what our mind has conceptualized that, treat them like a criminal versus they are a person who is engaged in criminal activity or criminal behavior. So there are a couple sociologists that I've been reading. One is Victor Rios. He published a book called Punish, Policing the Lives of Black and Latino Boys. And then the other really was around Elizabeth Alexander. I know a lot of us are familiar with Michelle Alexander and the new Jim Crow. But Elizabeth Alexander wrote a book called The Trayvon Generation. And essentially, what both of those authors said is that they really took the time to explore the root causes of the school to prison pipeline and mass incarceration and the impact that it has on black boys. So I wanted to put this in here because there was an incident probably in the last 60 days that I was called on to get involved with. And it was a young man who attends a Metro Atlanta school. And he's never had any disciplinary action taken against him. No formal, no informal. He was at a performing arts magnet school, right? Very creative and enjoyed life. Pretty much stayed to himself. This young man also had an IEP and previously and currently had a 504 plan on file. And so if you're familiar with individualized education plans and 504 plans, then what you know is that it provides and allows for accommodations when and where necessary for that student to be able to thrive in a public school, mainstream type of education. I mentioned that because this young man who had never been in trouble before, by admission of the school administration, was long-term suspended from his school and really from his school district because of one fight due to new gang laws in the state of Georgia that basically says if there's 3 of you together and you're engaged in some kind of physical altercation, it is constituted as gang activity and there is 0 tolerance for that. So we rallied behind this young man and his family because we just thought that this was egregious. Because ultimately, I was like, this is way too easy to now put this young man into a system that historically and statistically increases the rate of which black boys then end up into the criminal justice system. One fight where no one was seriously injured. And in this day and age, I'll be honest with you, I'm more grateful that they chose to fist fight than to pull a weapon and to pull a gun on one another, which we are seeing as an epidemic across not just the city of Atlanta, but across this country. One fight resulted in him not being able to finish his school year at his home school, and his parents feeling forced into the decision of placing him in an alternative school, which very much runs like a prison. There's no extracurricular. Well, actually, to be honest, I think prisons get it a little bit better because at least in prison, you got some physical activity and some recreation time and none of that. These young men are patted down, right, when they come in. And so it's very dreary. It's very dark, both in symbolism and literally when you think about how some of these alternative schools are designed. And it makes me very upset because this young man is incredibly blessed because he has 2 parents who are going to fight for him. But what about all the other young men who don't have parents who know enough to find resources and support and help? Or they know that they need help, but they don't have the bandwidth to get it because they're working multiple jobs. Or they don't have the fiscal resources to enlist the help of attorneys and caseworkers. It's too easy for them now to throw this young man into a system that, again, easily leads to the school to prison pipeline. Victor Rios will go on to share that the experiences he examined and how these black boys and their Latino counterparts are targeted by the justice system specifically due to their living in certain spaces and communities. This goes back to the idea of the criminality of being black and poor, of black boys and the criminality of being poor. Because when we think about certain zip codes, certain neighborhoods, insert yours from wherever you're living at this time, you automatically begin to think, oh, that's a part of town that you shouldn't go in. I remember that growing up. I remember growing up and knowing, even if it was not explicitly said, knowing, I don't need to be in a certain part of town after dark. For sure, if my mom and my daddy don't know where I'm at. How many of my cousins are with me? Whose beeper got battery powered? Now I'm aging myself. How quick can we get to a payphone? Who got quarters? All these things, right? We were literally going down checklists before we decided to ride out to any number of these neighborhoods that we just knew historically was not going to produce great results, right? Why? Because usually when we went to those particular neighborhoods, it was heavy police presence. Why? Because usually something was popping off and happening on a more regular basis. Even here in Atlanta, I love the neighborhood that I live in. I love the history. I love the proximity to everything that people from 4 or 5 counties over drive into the city on weekends or special occasions to partake in. But I also notice every day multiple police cars circling the block, up and down the street, posted up at the gas station, right, in the empty parking lot, creeping slowly down the side streets. Why? Because a couple of nights a week I can hear gunfire. I can hear gunshots, right, popping off for any given reason. Whether these people do not care that if you shoot the gun in the air, the bullet got to go somewhere, or they're shooting at somebody. I got trap houses across the street from me where any number of activity, just you think it, and I promise you it's happening over there. It's taking place. I now know why there's so many police officers that are very visible. It's not the case in every single neighborhood, right? But also the zip code that I live in is the poorest zip code in the city of Atlanta. All right. So, as we talk about that, I want to move over to Michelle Alexander. We're going to wrap this up in a little bit because we got all season to talk about this. Move over to Michelle Alexander. And so in the new Jim Crow, she begins to shed light. If you haven't read it, phenomenal read. Absolutely should do it. Nobody's paying me for that. Read it. Alexander sheds light on how beginning in grade school, black boys are signaled out and placed in an internal trajectory that leads directly to mass incarceration, right? This gives a little bit of nod to the 3rd grade reading test scores. There was data that was released years ago, and I will put all these links and statistics and all that stuff in the comments below. In the description box below. But there was data that was released years ago that talked about how, the 3rd grade reading test scores for black boys in particular were a predictor of whether or not these young men would end up in prison. And that's very sad because at 3rd grade, you are literally in... you're 8 years old. You're 8 years old in the 3rd grade, and someone is already determining your life trajectory at 8 years old. Very sad. And again, a lot of this is just me setting the tone of what is to come. So we're not going to get too deep today, right? But these are things I want you to think about. I think the next piece that I want to raise is around this idea of another author named Hannah Branch, who talks about the paradox of the color line. And here Branch highlights the experience of blacks in America and what implications that provides for a contemporary society. It draws on conclusions of what racism and discrimination have created. like or linking this to Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow, we must first acknowledge how the legacy of the old Jim Crow South still shows up today in policies and the treatment of black male bodies. Further, this can give some insight into how Atlanta has become the most economically inequitable city in the country. Branch will go on to say that the consistent black American reality has been of unequal opportunity and depressed economic rewards. Persistent black poverty must be understood as a direct consequence of historical, deliberate black labor market restriction. When there is no money, we are going to see crime. I said it at the beginning. You want to fix crime, you got to fix poverty. And some of this is generational. Some of this is cyclical, right? You do what you learn. And if the generations before you thought, well, the only way for me to get anything is to go and take it, then that's what you begin to teach those who come after you. Not making a pass. Not saying that it's right. Not celebrating it. But in order to fix something, we just got to say what it is. We have to be able to identify and address what the root cause of it is in order for us to fix it. Because to just talk about, oh, well, they should just do better, or they should know better, or that's not a good enough reason to commit a crime. Think about those who are a bit more financially stable, who are not worried about eating or roof over their children's heads, driving what they want, living where they want, but have this desire and this quest for more money. And then they begin to break laws, usually white collar crimes, because they want more. How is that different? Now, the crime that's committed, and some people may say, oh, well, white collar crimes are not crimes against people. Okay. By definition. But someone still gets hurt in the process. And if we're going to stand on principle alone, if those who have still want more, what do you think those who don't have want? Not the more, they're just trying to get the basic. All right. The last piece was second. First, I got this piece and then one more. Is this idea that there is something that is systematically and structurally wrong, and this is where I'm going to get in trouble, with our public education system as it relates to black boys. Pedro Noguera writes that from his experience as an educator, he offered that there are deep-seated inequities that contribute to so many black boys not excelling in school. While he delves deeper into the achievement gap and the cultural and historical factors that play with that, he also makes mention of the social, psychological, and emotional impact that it has. What is important to draw conclusions from is his sentiment that policy must change to reshape the role education has in the life of black boys. I then was personally intrigued to learn that socioeconomic status played little role in reversing this. That despite the access that black middle-class boys had, they too still fall behind their white counterparts. Which means there is something to this cultural bias as well to the socioeconomic status when we're thinking about what is the trouble with our black boys. I'm not going to get into the last piece that I had on this note, which is around what needs to happen in order to shift this narrative of what is going on. But here's what I do want to leave us with and what we need to focus on and what we need to think about moving forward. And I'm just going to read this to you, okay? What I have surmised is that being poor is directly related or tied to how you are treated and what others in society believe you are capable of. This then leads us to believe that more research should be done in the psychology of why mainstream society believes subconsciously that if you are poor, you are prone to participating in more criminal behavior. From a sociologist's perspective, it is the need to meet Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We've said that before. And that contributes to the willingness to engage in criminal behaviors. It is not that people who earn incomes below the poverty line are naturally prone to these activities in which they are later criminalized for. In fact, they're nurtured into it. Do we ever stop to think that the structure of our society and how we treat people who don't have actually nurtures this behavior? We don't want to. We don't want to accept that, right? We don't want to take responsibility for that piece, do we? No. It clearly can't be our fault for the decision that somebody else makes. And maybe not our fault as individuals, but the collective we, right? The collective we. When you're systematically a part of a generational poverty cycle, there are some decisions that society and policy, in fact, make for them. One could argue that each of us has a choice to make regardless of our circumstances, and there's some truth to that. However, choices are made from options. Ooh, there's that word again. And options are presented when there is opportunity to indulge in taking a chance to do something different. Those opportunities come when those who have influence and power deem you worthy. In fact, this is the breakdown of the cycle that has been referenced throughout this time. Horace Mann said in 1848 that education was the great equalizer, but education had a different purpose and intention then. Your zip code and your access to money has replaced that. And so what we know is that we see a need to really delve deeper into this. And also to see where our faith-based communities and their perspective and involvement in providing solutions and a framework for addressing these inequities that an overwhelming number of Black boys face in urban cities. Right? So, yeah, guys, this is going to be a bumpy ride, I think, this season. We're going to have to say some things and talk about some things that going to hit us to our core. But I'm ready. I think you are too. I'll still give it to you with a little bit of sweet tea. So just know a couple of quick things. Like this season, we're going to have special guests kind of just peppered throughout the season. They're going to join me here on the front porch or on their front porch or a front porch somewhere for us to have very critical conversations of what needs to happen as we think about this idea of Black boys and the criminality of being poor and what that means for our communities, what that means for our future. So stay tuned. Also share this with someone. Tell them about the podcast. Share this episode with them. Let them get caught up on all the other episodes from season 1 and the 2 before this one. And let me know if you have topics or if you yourself would love to be a guest this season on the front porch with Casey. Talk to you soon.